August 19, 1944, at German Army headquarters in East Prussia, General Alfred Jodl sat surrounded by maps, fuel charts, and urgent intelligence reports. The Western Front was collapsing. The Allied armies had broken out of Normandy and were racing across France faster than anything German military planners had ever imagined. Even so, the General Staff believed they saw the problem. The Americans had pushed too far. They had moved too fast. And in modern mechanized warfare, speed without supply was death. Patton's Third Army was the fastest-moving army in the world at that moment, but it was also the hungriest. A tank used fuel faster than a man could drink water. A single armored division needed 1,000 tons of supplies every day. And Patton had 12 divisions stretching across a 60-mile front. German intelligence officers calculated the distances. They measured the torn roads. They looked at the destroyed rail lines. They studied every pattern they had seen in Russia, in North Africa, and on the Eastern Front. And they all said the same thing. The Americans had outrun their own logistics. They expected the advance to halt within 48 hours. Some believed it would stop within 24. What none of them knew was that just over 100 miles away, nearly 6,000 American trucks were already moving east in a non-stop river of engines and headlights. They carried more than 12,000 tons of supplies every single day. They formed a supply system so large, so fast, and so reckless that German military science had no category for it. It was called the Red Ball Express, and it was about to change the entire war. To understand why the Germans were so confident, you have to understand their experience. The Wehrmacht had invented blitzkrieg. They had rewritten the rules of warfare at the start of the war by combining tanks, aircraft, and motorized infantry into a rapid strike force. But they also knew the limits of that system. Blitzkrieg wasn't just about speed, it was about timing. When the tanks pushed too far ahead of their supply lines, they stalled. It had happened in France in 1940. It had happened in Russia in 1941. German trucks broke down by the thousands. Horses couldn't keep up. Railways stopped at the wrong gauge. Gasoline was always short. German generals believed the Americans were now repeating that same mistake. An army couldn't move hundreds of miles in a single month and keep fighting. There was no way to feed it, no way to fuel it, no way to push ammunition forward fast enough. German officers thought they were watching the Americans outrun themselves right into a trap. German intelligence reports admitted that American supply requirements were massive. A Sherman tank burned through fuel at a shocking rate. An infantry division consumed 700 tons of food, ammunition, and equipment every day. An armored division required 1,000 tons. Multiply that by 12 divisions, then stretch those supplies across roads filled with bomb craters, destroyed bridges, and constant traffic. The Germans believed the Americans had reached the mathematical limit of warfare. They called it a law of physics. They believed Patton would be forced to stop, giving the German army time to regroup and form new defensive lines. But while German officers were writing these calculations, American logistics officers were meeting inside a borrowed French farmhouse near Le Mans. They had reached the same conclusion as the Germans. The traditional supply system was collapsing. Railway cars were stuck. Depots were overflowing. Trucks were scattered across France. Patton needed more supplies than any previous army in history. Something radical had to be done. Lieutenant Colonel Laurent Ayres proposed it. A one-way highway system, running from the Normandy ports straight to the front. Every truck would drive 20 hours a day. No pauses except for refueling. No slowdowns. No blackouts at night. Headlights on. Engines roaring. Absolute priority over all other traffic. If a truck broke down, mechanics would get 15 minutes to repair it. If they couldn't, they would push it into a ditch. The goal was simple. Move at least 12,500 tons every day. It was a plan that violated every military rule. It ignored discipline. It ignored safety. It ignored caution. It ignored sleep. It relied entirely on speed, improvisation, and the willingness of drivers to push themselves and their trucks beyond normal limits. Within a day and a half, the Red Ball Express was running. The system was simple in design but enormous in scale. 2 roads, one for loaded trucks moving forward and another for empty trucks returning. Checkpoints every 50 miles, each one manned by military police who kept the traffic moving and pulled out any truck that slowed down. Mechanics were deployed along the roads like medical teams in a war zone. They swapped engines, changed tires, and cannibalized broken vehicles for parts. Thousands of trucks lined the roads in single continuous columns. German observers later said they looked like rivers of steel. The trucks themselves were the famous GMC CCW 2.5-ton trucks, known as the Deuce and a Half. They weren't elegant, but they were tough. They could carry heavy loads, ford through water, run through mud, and take a beating. The United States built more than 500,000 of them during the war. Germany did not have one factory capable of producing vehicles in those numbers. Most of the Red Ball Express drivers were African-American soldiers. They served in segregated units. They weren't allowed to fight in most front-line positions. But they were entrusted with one of the most crucial missions of the war. These men drove day and night with almost no rest. They pushed trucks up hills, through rainstorms, through fog, through German roadblocks, and past artillery fire. They worked themselves to exhaustion. Some drove until they hallucinated. Some died in accidents or mechanical fires. But they kept moving. German units watching from hills above the Red Ball routes were confused and shocked. They reported endless streams of trucks with headlights on, visible for miles. It looked like suicide. German doctrine stressed camouflage, spacing, silence, and blackout discipline. The Americans seemed to ignore all of it. They moved openly, loudly, constantly. They acted as if nothing could stop them, and nothing did. In the first week alone, the Red Ball Express delivered almost 90,000 tons of supplies. That was more than some entire German armies received in a month. German intelligence officers dismissed the number as impossible. But it was true, and it was only the beginning. The Americans didn't care about preserving vehicles. They cared about speed. They ran their trucks until the engines gave out. They replaced entire vehicles instead of repairing them. If 10 trucks died on the road, but the load reached the front faster, that was considered a success. The Americans treated trucks like ammunition, something to use, not something to protect. The Germans didn't understand this. They believed logistics was about perfect planning and precise maintenance. They believed every truck was valuable. But in America, factories were producing vehicles faster than the Red Ball could destroy them. Ship after ship arrived at French ports with brand new trucks to replace the ones ruined by the road. To the Americans, losing 5,000 vehicles was unfortunate. To the Germans, it was unthinkable. The Germans also didn't understand American improvisation. When traffic jammed on the Red Ball route, drivers used side roads. When a bridge collapsed, American engineers built a replacement overnight. When trucks got stuck, bulldozers pushed them out of the way. The Americans built new routes, extended old ones, and reorganized the entire system in hours. German planners needed weeks to do what American sergeants did in a single afternoon. As Patton's army continued to push east, the Red Ball Express kept pace. In early September, the 4th Armored Division advanced 67 miles in a single day. They paused for fuel and ammunition. The moment they stopped, Red Ball trucks were already arriving. By noon, they were moving again. German generals refused to believe the reports at first. No armored force should be able to move that quickly for that long. But intercepted American radio traffic confirmed it. Fuel was the biggest surprise of all. German armies rationed fuel constantly. Their tanks often sat idle for lack of gasoline. By contrast, the Americans had so much fuel that they burned thousands of gallons just to deliver more fuel. They built supply dumps so large that German observers thought they were seeing entire army depots. They built pipelines under the English Channel. They placed tanker trucks every 25 miles along the Red Ball route. Fuel became so abundant that American soldiers dumped gasoline into ditches during emergencies because they knew more was coming. For German soldiers fighting on the front line, the sound of the Red Ball Express was haunting. They could hear American trucks moving all night, every night. German units rationed ammunition down to a few rounds per man. American artillery units fired without restriction, confident they would be resupplied the same day. Some German soldiers reported hearing ghost convoys, phantom engine noises they believed were real because they feared American supply so deeply. The psychological impact was enormous. German officers realized they weren't just fighting American tanks or American infantry, they were fighting American industry. They were fighting the factories of Detroit, the steel of Pittsburgh, the rubber of Ohio, and the assembly lines that produced trucks in numbers no European nation could match. By late September, the Red Ball Express was reaching its limits. The round trip was nearly 700 miles. Drivers were collapsing, trucks were dying. German intelligence believed the system was finally breaking down. But American commanders responded instantly. They built new transfer hubs. They cut routes into shorter segments. They doubled the number of trucks. They brought in more drivers. Within days, the Red Ball Express was moving more supplies, not fewer. The Germans tried to replicate the system during the Battle of the Bulge. They captured American trucks and planned to use them for their own supply lines, but it failed almost immediately. German drivers didn't know how to maintain the vehicles. German mechanics didn't have spare parts. German fuel stocks were too low to keep the trucks running. German doctrine emphasized repair, not replacement. Without the American industrial machine behind them, the German version of the Red Bull collapsed. Winter made everything harder. Rain, snow, and ice turned the Red Bull roads into dangerous hazards. Trucks slid off the side of hills, engines froze, drivers shivered in the cold cabins. But they kept rolling. Even at 15 miles per hour, they delivered supplies. German divisions froze in place because their vehicles couldn't move in the winter weather. American trucks, chained and reinforced, continued. By November 1944, railroads across France had been repaired enough to replace the Red Ball Express. The operation officially ended after 82 days. But in that short period, it delivered more than 400,000 tons of supplies. It broke thousands of trucks. It consumed tens of millions of gallons of fuel. It wore out thousands of men. And it shortened the war by months. German generals later admitted that the Red Ball Express demonstrated something they had never considered, that industrial capacity could become a weapon greater than tanks, planes, or guns. They said the Americans fought with factories, not just soldiers. They said German doctrine had been fighting the last war, while America had invented the next one. After the war, many Red Ball Express drivers returned home and built America's trucking industry. They founded companies, opened logistics businesses, and designed modern transport systems based on what they learned crossing France. They had moved the largest military supply operation in history, and they brought that knowledge back to civilian life. But the most powerful legacy of the Red Ball Express may be the people who ran it. Most of them were African-American soldiers who served in an army that treated them as second-class citizens. They were denied equal rights, they were segregated, they were given the hardest jobs, but during those 82 days they proved something that changed the war. They proved that they could outperform anyone when given responsibility. Many historians believe their performance helped push the US military toward desegregation after the war. German officers who witnessed the Red Ball Express later said they had never imagined logistics could move that fast. They had never imagined an enemy with that many trucks, that much fuel, or that much determination. One captured German officer said he stood by the side of the road in Belgium and watched the convoys pass every few minutes, hour after hour, day after day. He finally said to a captured American driver, "We prepared for your tanks and your planes. We never prepared for your trucks. How do you defeat an enemy who has more trucks than you have soldiers?" The answer rolled past him in a column of engines and dust. The Red Ball Express didn't just support the Allied advance. It made the advance possible. It turned logistics into strategy. It turned trucks into weapons. It delivered victory at 35 miles per hour, day and night, for 82 straight days. And it proved a simple but devastating truth. In modern warfare, the side that can move the most supplies the fastest will always win.